Vienna is an amazing city. It's the most beautiful city you will ever see, amazing public transport until it gets to 11 p.m. And also, if you're loud after 11 p.m., the nice blonde officer will come up to you and tell you in German to follow orders, which is to shut the f*** up, you're disturbing the neighbors. Besides Vienna being a very beautiful city, it has also been consistently ranked the most livable city in the world, 4 times including this year. And the secret does not lie in the beauty, the schnitzel, or even the beer industry Austrians have been crafting relentlessly since the 14th century. It's very simple things that most countries get wrong, such as housing, healthcare, and the education. You see, social housing gets a bad reputation because of hoods like the O Block, where the American government purposefully redlined them so those areas wouldn't get proper funding or infrastructure, because they didn't want black people or Italians to live with white people. The second reason is because a certain one of my ancestors decided to house people in the ugliest fucking buildings possible. Literally the reason Commieblocks look like this is because it was built like Legos with fucking default colored concrete because it was the cheapest, so more people could move out of their rural big houses and into the city, consequently crashing Russia's birth rate to the point where it has never recovered, and now will never recover either. Georgians sent Stalin out to Russia to crush Russia's birth rate and sent Erdogan to crash the Turkish lira and the Turkish economy. 2 true Georgian patriots. To show you how good Vienna's housing policies are, I want you to think of what an apartment for rent would look like in your city or the major city in your country. $1,000, $1,500, $3,000, $4,000 a month? Jarvis, let me do some math. Vienna average salary, $2,967 after tax. How much to rent a 2-bedroom apartment in Vienna for? $507. New York average salary, $5,332 after tax. How much to rent a 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn for? Oh shit. Oh damn, it's fucked up. Hey bro, you know New Yorkers would get a heart attack if I showed them a 5-bedroom apartment renting in an extremely gorgeous city for less than $1,000. Now I know you guys are fucking fuming watching this. I was fuming as well when I found this information out. But honestly, the way Austria was able to achieve this is so simple. Remember how city skylines too fixed the housing issue by removing landlords? More than 60% of the city's 1.8 million inhabitants live in subsidized housing, and nearly half of the housing market is made up of city-owned flats or cooperative apartments. Social housing policies in Vienna have been shaped by the political commitment that housing is a basic right. We insisted on not privatizing social housing in the 1980s and 90s when other cities were selling their municipal housing projects. Today, more than ever, we can see that this strategy has been successful. Once the apartments are gone, the city has only a small lever to regulate rents. Low rents and cheap housing is probably the best thing you can do for your city today, and it was even true back then. Of course, the working class people loved it. Honey, 60% of our salary doesn't have to go into housing anymore. Woo! Even Austrian industrialists like the idea of social housing because they realized that low rents would allow them to keep production costs low, which means more stuff gets produced, which means the country gets richer. Money. The only requirements for accessing social housing are meeting a cap on income that is so high that 75% of the population qualifies. So if you make less than $60,000 a year, you qualify for social housing. That is the same as the median salary in the United States. This is because they also want the middle class to live in the Vienna social housing, so it doesn't turn into ghettos where only poor people live. And it also requires you having lived in the city for 2 years, meaning residents tend to be from diverse backgrounds and aren't segregated from one another. As a quality safeguard, the city requires every new project to be greenlit by a jury of experts. Rather than pick the cheapest projects, proposals are instead selected based on clearly defined quality criteria such as economy, social sustainability, ecology, and architecture. You see, what brought this ideology was that in World War I, the Austrians, along with the Hungarians, were the bad guys, just like in the Second World War. So this resulted in Austria, including Vienna, getting leveled to shit, and Hungary losing 75% of their territory, which makes Hungarians angry to this day and pretend they will get those territories back. After World War I, the Austrians were in a big housing shortage where they needed to house a lot of people very quickly and efficiently. In 9 years, they built more than 60,000 new apartments, allowing them to house as many as 200,000 people in Vienna, a tenth of the population. And then the same thing happened after World War II, but this time every country was in need of more housing because nearly every country got leveled. The difference is, for example, other countries didn't prioritize making these buildings look livable, and instead of integrating them into the city, they built a completely different district of these cheap, shitty houses outside of the city, which is the formula to getting ghettos. Because it was so bad living there, only poor people would remain there because anyone who had the money to quote-unquote get out of the hood eventually would, cementing that district as a ghetto and not a good place to live in. The most famous example of this post-World War I housing is the Karl Marx Hof, a building more than a kilometer or 0.7 miles long in length that was designed to house 5,000 people. And you can just see the quality of this building. They have decorations on it, a big courtyard, different color schemes, so it looks nice and cool. Meanwhile, us fucking Soviets decided to build this village house in Budapest that looks like this and only houses 3,000 people instead of 5,000. And the Karl Marx Hof absolutely mugs the village house in Budapest. The premises of the Karl Marx Hof include amenities such as baths, kindergartens, a fucking library, doctor's offices, and business offices. Vienna's social housing was designed to be indistinguishable from private buildings housing the city's richer people. And even a building as big as Karl Marx Hof still included statues and decorative elements. This building, looking so nice even though it was literally built 96 years ago, combined with Vienna's policy that lets 75% of the population meet the social housing criteria, is the reason why this didn't turn into a ghetto, but a place where everyone can live together in their good, cheap apartments. They have a policy that does not result in the Prague problem. The Prague problem is that the city of Prague is less of a city and more of a Disneyland attraction for tourists. The center of Prague literally feels like a theme park. It's all tourists and basically no Czechs actually live there because it's too expensive, and the reason it's too expensive is because whoever actually owns that apartment, whether by inheritance or they're an oligarch that actually has the money to buy an apartment, chooses to rent it out to tourists for short-term stays rather than long-term rentals for people that would actually like to live there. This causes the city to not be actually lived in, and instead of normal corner store businesses, for example, like a convenience store, they have souvenir shops, tourist traps, and scam exchange places. Because of this, Prague has the least affordable housing in Europe, and it resulted in the city being turned into a theme park for tourists instead of being actually lived in by people that would want to live there. The Czech Supreme Court confirmed in 2023 that owners of individual apartments are legally allowed to rent out their apartments for short-term stays without any limits. They keep saying they're gonna implement laws and stuff to fix this problem, but nothing has changed. In Vienna, if you live in social housing which is government owned, you cannot rent your apartment out for short-term stays to tourists, which nearly solved this problem by itself. And as of July this year, they introduced a new law where even if you own your property, you can only rent it out to tourists or short-term rentals for 90 days a year. Otherwise, you would have to apply for a permit or get hit with a massive 50,000 euro fine, which is around $55,000. And to get the extended permit, the place you're renting out needs to be built without a housing subsidy, and it needs to not be in a residential zone. So that already cuts out a lot of these apartments to be taken up by tourists instead of people who would actually live there. Also, another good thing is, remember the fact that you cannot make more money than this, for example, to qualify for social housing? Yeah, that's kind of not true because, and I really like this, a lot of students are in social housing because students are broke and need cheap housing. So even when they advance through their careers and start making more money, the Austrian government does not check up on them or kick them out because they don't qualify for social housing anymore. It is their apartment that they've been paying rent for, and they will not be punished for making more money now that they've advanced through their career, which is very nice in my opinion and gives the person living there a very nice social safety net where, hey, I won't get kicked out of my apartment just because I started making more money. There are also tenant protection laws that allow you to rent your apartment basically forever with limits on rent increases, even if the building is is owned privately. This protects you from Diddy coming in and increasing your rent just because he feels like it and blaming it on property tax or whatever. Rents are regulated by the city government so that none of the residents pay any more than 20 to 25% of their household income. The downside to this is that you can't buy these flats. We do not sell any buildings. Buildings that are owned by the city or by a subsidized social housing company are not allowed to be sold. We've never privatized and we never will. We don't want to have a situation where you can identify the social status of a person by their home address. In 2023, only 19.8% of people live in the houses/apartments they actually own, which means that most Viennese are tenants that pay rent. However, you can still of course buy an apartment to live in for yourself that is not social housing, and honestly, the prices aren't bad at all. This is like Vaca in Tbilisi prices, and Vienna is a much nicer city to live in. Where does the money for all this come from? Vienna spent more than 500 million euros in 2019 for housing reconstruction and renovation for their old buildings. With this investment, around 7,000 new social housing apartments are built every year and around 5,000 are renovated. And guys, Vienna is beautiful. Trust me, they are keeping that shit in check and renovated. Unlike, you know, the post-USSR Commieblocks. I would also like to thank the Austrian government for being so transparent about where they're spending their money. There's a website where you can literally see where and what percent of their money goes to what, so they made my research easy. The average Austrian pays 32% of their money to taxes, which for Americans is a high amount, but fucking Turkey pays 40%. And all Turkey knows is bomb Kurdish children, supply Azerbaijan, and crash their currency. And rent in Istanbul for a one-bedroom apartment is literally twice what you would pay for it in Vienna. Most European countries have social housing programs, it's just that some places don't put their mouth where their money is, or however that saying goes. Basically, Austria gets shit done, and every other European country should follow.
Hello, it is me, Josep Jurashvili from Bank of Georgia. Gattsu needs you to buy these Georgian shirts. Why? So he can increase the GDP of his country and finally get enough visa privilege to enter the United States. So, if you want to see Gattsu in a state near you, please go ahead and order these amazing 100% cotton t-shirts. They're very good and literally everyone loves them. So, you know, just go order it. You'll support me too.
And the thing is, for example, Eastern Europeans don't need to really go big on building new apartments or something because we had social housing. The thing is that now they just look dog shit. If Eastern European governments spent money renovating these houses instead of buying G-Wagons and, you know, somehow the country's leader's best friend always becomes the richest person in the country, if not the leader himself, Eastern European cities could also look like this. Instead of me seeing my city constantly get edited into grey Eastern European montages. I really like the ideology that housing is not a good, it's a right, because every person, regardless of their class, needs a roof over their head. Like and subscribe, and goodbye.